So yeah, I usually like have to do my intro 5 times, so hopefully that's not the case today. I feel really awkward like being watched while I'm doing this. But okay, hello Whiskers! Welcome to today's video. As you can see, today we have a special guest. This is Vuvu Vena from Vuvu Vena Reads. Say hi, Vuvu.
Hi everyone.
And today we're going to have a fun discussion about the differences in how we look at books and whether or not you should prepare. If you've watched my channel at all, you know that I love to go in blind. I don't really research a lot about a book before I go into it. I sort of just start reading and go from there. And then Vuvu, on the other hand, does a lot more research into the authors, into the genre, into what the book is about before she starts reading. So I thought we'd have a discussion about that, and about the different approaches to starting a book, or yeah, to starting reading a book. Okay, so tell me about your process. As I said, I go in blind. I buy a book, maybe based on the cover, maybe based on a recommendation, maybe based on nothing at all. So how do you approach a book? How do you start?
Okay, so while I love knowing a lot about the author before I start a book, I also don't like spoiling myself for a book. So I don't really research what the book is really about. I'd like to find out obviously what genre it is because I am into YA and that kind of our kind of genre, but I am reading more out of the African continent of late. So I want to know if I'm reading from Africa, I want to know, okay, is this author from Ethiopia? What's Ethiopia all about? What kind of story is she going to try and tell? Let's say, for example, the book that I've picked up lately, which is Maza Mengesti's The Shadow King, which is shortlisted for the Booker Prize, right? She's
Yeah.
an Ethiopian American author. So that's the kind of information I want to know. She's an Ethiopian American author. She's writing about war from the perspective of women in Ethiopia way back way, right? So for me that's enough because as I'm going to read that book, I'll understand that it's written by a female Ethiopian American author, and she's writing from a vantage point of her experience as well as her country, right? So that's the kind of thing that I need to know going in so that the things that might shock me or the things that might not shock me are informed by, okay, this is the person actually writing the story.
Okay, so that's sort of interesting, and I'm sort of gonna. I just have a couple of questions written down, but I think especially going into the author, um, I wonder what you think about the concept of writing what you know. Do you think that, for example, a Black African woman is the best at writing Black African woman, or alternatively could be the only person qualified to write about Black African women? Or is it possible to write outside of what you know with enough research?
I do definitely think that you can write outside of what you know. Some of the best books, or rather the books that I've enjoyed of people that I feel are not writing from their race per se, are
Okay.
The Help by Catherine Stock. Is it Catherine Stock? Something. The Help,
Okay.
though, it was turned into a movie. It's written about a black woman. It's centered around a black woman during slavery, and from what I understand, Catherine is not black. It's the same that we could say about To Kill a Mockingbird by Lee Harper. It's the same kind of concept. They're not writing from their experiences, but they are writing something that they'd have had to research to be able to make us feel what those main characters are. So you can definitely write from outside of your experience, but I do think that there's a level of um I want to say rawness, maybe, when you are writing from a place of vulnerability, when you are writing yourself into a story, where you are writing from a place of experience that I'm not saying always, but that might be missing from somebody who's had to associate with your story through research, if you get what I'm trying to say. So definitely people can write from whatever vantage point they want, but I do think that there is something special about somebody writing something that is honest and true to them
I
that doesn't
think,
require that much research. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think I sort of have two things to say about that. First, I do think you're right that there is something more real and raw about writing from your own experience. One of my favorite books that I reviewed recently was Who Fears Death, and that was written by a Nigerian woman, and it's about African womanhood. I wouldn't call it feminism because it's not that. It's a very African style of empowerment that feminism just doesn't entirely encompass because it doesn't take all of that into account. and it's really raw, and it talks about female circumcision, which is something that happens in Africa as opposed to the West, and things like that. And I really thought, I mean, that was the only book I've ever read that really the rape was done well and it meant something in the book. And I do think like a lot of that is attributed to the fact that she is an African woman who might have gone through all these things. I didn't go into her backstory too much, but I do think that's part of it. On the other hand, the two books you've mentioned, by white authors about black people, both have the same trope, which I find a little bit, well, not the best. So in both The Help and To Kill a Mockingbird, there's like this white woman, this white man or white woman who has to come in and save the black people from racism, which is not necessarily the best message you want to send. That like black people need white people to help them out.
So I'm not talking about the entirety of the story. I'm talking about the characterization of the individual characters in there. So the mere fact that even though there is that trope, I agree with you that the trope is definitely there. I'm talking to the fact that there is a window of truth in how they depict the black man in those situations, right?
Okay.
Not to say that I'm not talking about the overall message of the story. I'm saying that this white person could have come in and been able to depict what a portion of what being black in that time looked like through the black characters that they created.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying, that they didn't have to experience being black in a black skin at that time for them to birth those characters. So sometimes that, in terms of characterization, when I'm taking those books as examples, can work. But I'm totally in agreement with you. The whole white savior trope does come through in those books, and it isn't something that I agree with. But I would commend the effort into trying to write outside of your skin in the characters that they created.
Yeah, I think that's always an interesting thing, because it is the truth that a lot of times when you're looking at the characterization of it, you know, that whole men writing women thing, of people writing out of their space, and especially if it's into a space of kind of marginalized people, I guess you could say, people who are less well known. I guess it's easy to write men because of like the toxic traits. They don't need emotions, they don't need all of that, so it's easy to write simple men. But if you write a woman like that, it's usually frowned upon, and like the men writing woman thing is a real thing. So I don't know. I often find myself wondering about this, because obviously I dabble in writing and I want to write diverse characters, but then it's like, could I do it well? Because I think most of the books I've read, then some of the diverse characters have some issues, like the white savior thing, or like in Dark Tower I'm reading right now. The black woman is kind of forgotten for a whole book. She's pregnant. She's just been raped by a demon and she's pregnant, but it's not important right now. And I feel like things like that, it's difficult not to pick up on it.
So I think that goes back to I think why I try to understand the author as well, because I do believe that writers can't be everything for every reader, right? And I do think I give a little bit of leeway to say that this person can only ever truly write from their experience. So if something in your, and I'm not saying your experience is right or wrong, but if something in your experience minimizes a certain group of people suffering, then it will come through in a sense in your writing. And it might not be an intentional, I want to forget about the black woman who's suffering in my story, but because that's your experience, and that doesn't make you a bad person, but because that's who you are or how you've been socialized, it might seep through in your writing without you intending it to. Which is why I think that when I like to look at a book, I like to look at the holistic, who's written this, who's the creator of this thing, and then what is the story that's being told, and what are the characters that are being formed, and who have they forgotten, or what kind of things have they used as triggers in the story or as tropes in the story, and why would they use that? Because this is who they are, this is their background, and this is why they might find this important. And like you're saying, it's not always a good measure, because some people can write outside of their experience, and they can write outside of their experience very well. But what I'm trying to get at is that who you are does come through in your story in a sense.
Yeah, no, I think definitely an artist is part of the art they create to a sense. Um, but then if you had to pick between two books, both of them depicting a story about a black woman, for example, that's just sort of the easiest example to use. Would you, if you do research about both authors, would you go for the white American man writing about a black South African woman? Or would you go for a black South African woman writing about a story about a black South African woman?
And I couldn't choose both. I had to choose one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll definitely first go for the black South African woman writing about black South African women, because I can trust automatically when I open that book. There is no need to build trust. I'll automatically trust you because you're talking about yourself. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
As opposed to a black American male who has to figure out what being a South African woman is. And it doesn't matter how hard that male can try, they will never truly know what it is to be a South African black woman.
Yeah, and I think especially reading some South African books, there's a lot of things that I guess Americans would have had to explain. Where we know, and sort of, if you say taxi, you don't need to explain what it is. We know what it is. We don't. There's a lot of those context clues that you already know. So it's like you're almost speaking in the same dialect. So I understand what you mean by that. Like there's a lot of things that then that don't have to be taught or don't have to be learned. So that kind of brings up the question for me: who's the best to write to an international audience? So if we have those things that don't need to be learned, if you want to write a book that teaches about these experiences, who would be best to write it? Somebody coming in, doing the research and learning, and then teaching, or somebody who is intimately aware and already knows, but perhaps takes some things for granted?
So this is why I was saying, do I have to choose one? Because this is my thing, right? I would probably read both books because both books would have some information in them that one of the books wouldn't have. So you would learn a lot about American males from reading a story about American males trying to talk about South
Yeah.
African females, right? So I wouldn't I'm not pro exclusion in that sense, right? So when you're saying to me who's the best person to write stories for an international audience, everybody can write those stories because I feel like there's something to be learned in everybody's perspective. And I think that's the sort of beauty in books, and even knowing who's writing the books, is that you start to learn about people and how they think, their psyche, outside of actually meeting them. And knowing that this is a black female from South Africa that's written this, and a black female from Australia has written something similar, it helps you to understand just how our socialization influences our perspective of life. So they could really be tackling the same concept, but their outcomes could be different because of their experience in those different societies. Do you understand?
Yeah, I actually think that would be really fascinating to have like two of the exact same stories written by two different authors, and to see like which differences would they make, which themes would they tackle more heavily, how would they approach certain things. I actually think that's really fascinating. It's very different than the way I approach my reading, but I do think there's a lot of merit to it.
Yeah. So for me, and you find that you end up finding the kind of writing or the kind of author that you do like. So I know, for example, that I definitely love female authors because I resonate with that, right? And I find that a lot of female authors do bring out the best attributes about being female, as opposed to most male authors and what they try to they pick up in female characters. As well as that, female authors are not scared of having female leads, and they don't always bring out this whole damsel in distress type of narrative. And I think that what we feed our minds often is what we end up believing, right? So we need to see more of those female leads. And I think that by picking up stories, especially stories of conflict, or where there is a sense of adventure or heroism that is put on a female lead. And yes, sometimes I will go for the black female lead, but I've come to learn that I'm just attracted to strong female characters in books. It doesn't matter what racial group they fall into. So knowing that certain female authors mostly write strong female leads is what makes me keeps me going back to female authors as opposed to male.
It's weird because when you talk about strong female leads, I think my vision of what it is in a book is different from yours, because you read a lot more contemporary. I think you're very into fantasy right now, but you read a lot more contemporary overall than I do. So for me, a strong female character in the fantasy sense is usually actually someone who can fight, and I sometimes find that frustrating because it's like such, let's give this female character male strength and then she's strong. Where is that different in contemporary, or are they just like all badass bitches, or are they like softer feminine characters who are also depicted as being strong in contemporary writing?
I think that when we are being honest, right, if you're going back to the whole socialization element, no author can escape the how we've been socialized when it comes to gender specific roles, right, and what certain genders should be. So you do want to depict. I find that a lot of authors do want to depict their genders in the way that we've already come to understand them, right?
Okay.
So if we see females as being soft and emotional, etc., etc., I do find that they do carry these traits. But I find that when I'm talking about a strong female lead in some contemporary books, it's in spite of these traits, this person is still a stronger human in the sense of how they deal with relationships, in the sense of how they deal with conflict, in the sense of how they resolve any trouble in their path, as opposed to men. I will say though that what you're saying about female leads in your fantasies is the same for females who write females, because in some sense they do want to make the males look like they are
Yeah.
not worthy of that space, so they do exaggerate the male characteristics that we've come to know, and they do make the female superior to that, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like they reinvent. They don't make the male soft in the sense that, like you're saying, that the female has now been given male traits. It's not like they give the men feminine traits. It's just that they elevate the female over the male, if you get what I'm trying to say,
Yeah. So they
while
almost,
keeping them the way.
it's sort of frustrating for me because almost like the strong female character is basically the ultimate alpha male with boobs, and like it's fun to read, and it's definitely was a fun fantasy for me growing up, but I'm sort of getting tired of it. I want a strong female character who can't fight, just like who is actually feminine and has other attributes, like she can maybe get people together, or she can emotionally get people together, or maybe she's manipulative or a seductress, not like a seductress who will then stab you in the heart, like actually use more feminine, even like toxic feminine traits, but don't just make my strong character a man with boobs. I want that femininity instead of just elevating masculinity as strength the whole time.
No, I definitely hear that, and I definitely do think that you would find some of those in contemporary fiction.
Yeah, I'm struggling with fantasy, so maybe that's just I need to broaden my scope a bit. Um, then the next question I have is also regarding being prepared for a book. And this is sort of, I'm not very scared of this, but I do think that some people with a little bit more trauma in their past do have to do some due diligence before they read. And by this I mean, um, do you think that it might be useful or helpful to have trigger warnings for books? For example, if like we have ratings for movies, this book is violence 18, sex, nudity, whatever. And if you have found that books like that trigger you or upset you, that you should be forewarned. Because I think reading is a much more intimate experience than watching a movie. You can look away or mute the movie, but once words have been written on the page, they're in your head. It's much more intimate to me than a movie. And I wonder if you think that's one of the benefits of being like forewarned, of reading reviews and finding out about the author, is getting those trigger warnings.
Okay, so okay, I'll answer your question, but I've got some questions in my mind as well, right?
Okay.
On how I approach the answer. I will say though that because of the intimacy of words that you are reading, I don't think that the things that have triggered me or have impacted me in books are things that I didn't see coming.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that trigger warning to some extent is a spoiler, right? However, like you're saying, people have had different traumas in their lives and might need to know the basic of what it is that they are getting themselves into. I've seen books with an age restriction on them. I've seen them. There is one from South Africa, actually, the something about Stellenbosch scandals in Stellenbosch, but it says no under 18, right? So
Okay.
I don't know whether that story is exploring violence or is exploring sexuality or well, sex in the sense of fornication or what the case is, but it does say no under 18, but it doesn't say what the trigger is, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm saying, the most impactful things that have shocked me in books and have triggered me are things that I didn't see coming. Had I been told that this book is going to be about, and the thing is, we don't only get triggered by things that we've experienced, right? We get triggered by things that are just vile human acts upon other human beings.
Yes.
So if somebody had said to me that this book touches on rape or it touches on murder or it has a suicide trigger or whatever, it might have spoiled me for the book. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Because I would have gone into the book searching for those triggers instead of letting the story build to the point where those triggers come through. And the other thing for me is that the level of trigger might not be the same for everybody because of maybe your comprehension of the subject matter. So somebody else might not be triggered by death as much as the next person because of whatever reason that might be.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how to fully answer that question because I do empathize with people who find themselves in books in ways that they were not ready to see themselves as. And at the same time, I do think that reading is a process of also discovery and discovering yourself and what you think about and what compassion that you might have. So for somebody else, it might be a good thing to pick up a story with a lot of triggers. For somebody else, it might not be. And I think that is all about knowing yourself and what you would gravitate towards, as opposed to that books should have warnings. I don't know. I don't know. My answer at the very end is that I'm not too certain. But yeah, I don't at the moment I don't feel like I'm pro that kind of thing because I feel like it takes away from the reading experience. Like I'm saying, I'll search for the triggers instead of reading the book.
Do you think like the 18 violence rating or the 18 sex or nudity rating spoils a movie for you, or don't you experience movies in the same way?
I was about to say I don't. And the thing is that takes me back to socialization. That is something that has always been there as a warning for us growing up, right? So for some people, especially for me, with the people that I surrounded myself with, especially because we were in boarding school and you had to have a certain time and a certain whatever to watch certain movies. We couldn't wait to be 13 to watch the 13 PG movies. We couldn't wait to be 16 to be allowed to watch those movies. So with books, there's never been that kind of restriction, if you get what I'm trying to say. A person can go, yes, in libraries you'll have children's section, etc., etc. But then what I'm trying to say is that as an adult, all books are open to you, whether or not they're aged any. At my age, I can pick up any book and read it. No one is going to say I'm not meant to read this. And because there has never been that indoctrination into this is a book that you're allowed to read, this is not a book that you're allowed to read, I freely gravitate towards books. And I've picked up a lot of books that do have triggers without me knowing that they have triggers. And like I'm saying, I appreciate the fact that nobody told me that these stories had triggers in them because my discovery of those triggers means something different as opposed to when I've been forewarned that there's a trigger in this. And with movies, I'm not really as big with movies anymore, but it would depend on what I have heard and why I feel the need to watch the 18VLN whatever movie because there has to be some kind of motivation. Whereas it's different for me with books. I don't need a strong motivation for me to read. My motivation is the need to read.
Yeah, yeah,
As
yeah.
opposed with a movie, I'd have to really be told, okay, this is exceptional, pick it up, you're missing out, or whatever the case might be.
And what about for younger readers? Because we're both adults, we would be able to read whatever we want anyway. But I remember I was reading adult books as a child. I very quickly got over the young adult stage. I think, yeah. So, and I know one of my friends in high school, I think she was grade nine, accidentally picked up 50 Shades of Grey and then read halfway through the book before she really realized what was going on because she didn't understand the way it was written. She didn't really know what was going on, and then she asked her mom one question, and then her mom freaked out. And I remember when I was in primary school as well, there was a vicious rape in the book, and I that was prescribed reading, and I didn't understand it, so I went to my mom and asked. And then she went to the teachers actually and like asked them not to show us this book anymore. And that was actually a children's book. So I'm wondering, on the one hand, like we shouldn't be censoring information or stopping children from getting certain information. But on the other hand, there should be some protection in place so that a child can't stumble blindly into all of this violence and horror that sometimes can be depicted in books.
No, I definitely do agree with you with that. Adults do exist in society to protect the children, and children up to whatever age you accept that your child is a child. And I do think that if you are working, let's say at a bookstore, and your bookstore has sections that says children's books or whatever, if your child comes up and if a kid comes up and buys a book that is outside of their domain, you do need to interrogate who's the book for. Why are you buying this? If it's a book that you really need, then your mom must come buy this one because it's outside of your range. Same as libraries. I don't think that kids should be allowed to check out books of that nature. But what I'm trying to say is that there's very little that you can do if you have left a child in a library, let's say, and they're not checking out the book, and then they pick up the book and they read it. There's really very little that you can do to protect that child from what they will consume in that book, right? So you can have your measures in place. I always say, for example, for my kids, I am at a place because they're very young where I curate the kind of books that I would like them to interact with right now. But there will come a point where they will decide for themselves and they will make the right and the wrong decisions as to what to consume. And that's how they would learn that, okay, this is not my kind of book and this is my kind of book. And I'm not saying that kids should pick up books with triggers. What I'm trying to say is that there's only so much that adults can do, and there's only so many times that you can be around a child that's reading.
Yeah, but if
So you instill that in as far as you can.
But if there were a sticker on the book that said, for example, like this is 18, sex, and violence, then a child could be
Yeah.
forewarned. Where, like, when I was a child, I picked up the adult books and I read them and I wasn't bothered about it. I read, like, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and all of those things. And then, I could just have easily, like my friend, have picked up something else, something maybe with more violent or more vicious content in it, and I would not have known before I read that content or before my mom explained to me what I just had read. So yeah,
Mm.
I think, I don't know, it's a very interesting conversation because I think it's strange how we treat the two different types of media so differently. I mean, I don't know why people think words on paper would be innocent or can't do harm in the same way that images on a screen can do harm.
I hear you. And for me, if you're saying trigger warnings in the sense that you age restrict books, right? Then that's fine. You can say 18 and 16. And like I'm saying, you'd have to be very close to that child to monitor whether or not they consume those things or not. But if you're saying trigger warnings, like this book, whole warning, trigger of suicide, rape, blah 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 blah. If that's what you're saying, I wouldn't appreciate seeing that in a book. Like I'm saying, because for me it would fall the discovery. But if it's just stamped no under 18 or no under 16 or whatever, then that's a different conversation. And to some extent, there is a rebellion in young people that if you are saying to me, I can't read this, this is when I actually want to read it to find out what is it that you don't want me to read. Do you understand? Whereas if you just leave it there on your mother's shelf, you're like, oh my God, there she is reading whatever. Oh, then they're not interested because you're not making a fuss over it, right?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for the very interesting discussion, Vuvu. I just wanted to keep it short and sweet. I think we very much now sort of can see the pros and cons of going in blind and knowing nothing and having no expectations whatsoever, as opposed to knowing a little bit about the perspective and being able to delve that for even more wealth and value out of a story. And also a quick discussion about trigger warnings, because I think this is a discussion that's going to come up again as the type of content that's out there seems to be getting more and more vile as time goes on. Or maybe we're just either less sensitive or more sensitive. I don't know. But yeah, so I do think this is a discussion that's going to be had again, especially with the younger generations reading more and more. So yeah, I think it was an interesting start. Thank you very much for your time. Bye,
Thank you.
listeners.
Bye.
Hello, Whiskers. I hope you guys enjoyed that discussion. This is Vuvu Vena's channel. That's what you're looking at right now. I'd really encourage you guys to go have a look. She is a friend of the channel's. And we do very different videos. Like, if I'm not scratching the itch, Vuvu definitely will. She reads definitely different from me. She definitely reads a lot more contemporary, and I feel like after this discussion, I've definitely been swayed, and I'm going to be reading more contemporary style books. Um, Especially her way of reading perspective into that is really interesting. Most of her videos are more blog style videos. So she's recently done these interesting videos where she kind of does a time lapse with her reacting live while reading the books. And I really enjoyed her commentary on that. So please check her out. I will put all her things down in the description, as well as hopefully on the screen now. So yeah, check her out and click the things. Bye, Whiskers.